afternoon, everyone. I'm Liz Sheehan, the chair of this committee for program performance and evaluation. I'm going to call our meeting to order. It's good to see you all. Let's just do like a quick, rotation around the room. Say who you are, how you're affiliated. So maybe with a service organization or if you're on the board, those kind of things. So Liz, chair, council member, and member of the HPI board.
Hi everyone, I'm Joy Andrade and I'm a member of the HPI board.
Hi, I'm Allison Compton. I'm the housing coordinator at Greenhouse 17.
Jamie Cody with Bluegrass Care Navigators with the Medical Respite Program.
Marty Jones, Director of Housing and Home Services with Community Action Council.
I'm Catherine Mitchell with Lexington Habitat for Humanity.
I'm Vanessa Israel, reentry at the jail.
I am Jeff Aaron. I am the Homelessness Prevention Manager with the OFUCG Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention.
I am Marissa Webb, and I'm the Continuum of Care Coordinator for the Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention.
David Chad, Senior Director of Programs. Thank you, Jeff. Here at the Hope Center.
Bruce Davis, HPI Board.
And we got a couple
One
more
more,
join us.
yeah. Let's get the rest of the table and then we'll go back here. Introduce yourself really quickly.
I'm Donnell Gordon. I'm with the Lexington Police Department. I'm with attendants.
Okay.
Danielle Sanders with Community and Resident Services.
And then you all.
I'm Devin. I'm the housing specialist and client service coordinator at Natalie Sisters.
Oh, I saw you on Monday. I was with the paramedicine team. The weekend back. Sorry.
Dustin Alvin, Street Outreach at Hope Center.
Jason's on the Street Outreach.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for being here. We do have 2 sets of minutes to approve, and this is for the entire membership of the COC can vote on these. So the first one is for October, so I want to ask if there are any edits or suggestions for change for those. Seeing none, I can take a motion to approve.
I move to approve the minutes for the October 19th, 2022 meeting of this committee.
Thank you, Bruce. And then I need second from Joy. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. And then we need to do the same for December, so I'll start by asking if there are any suggestions for edits or changes. Seeing none, I will take a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve.
Joy has the motion. I need a second.
I'll second.
Bruce will second this time. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Okay, thank you for that. And I will just ask, because we have a camera here that is for records for our minutes. So the person that actually does our minutes uses this to help type those out because they're not present here today. But if you could just speak up when you're talking so they can hear on the recording.
And also, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
When you're speaking?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we have 5 presentations today. 1 is from Bluegrass Care Navigators. 2 are from Community Action Council, and 2 are from Hope Center. We're going to start in that order that was on the agenda. So the first presentation is Bluegrass Care Navigators. I also want to thank everybody for submitting all of their materials in the new format. I really appreciate it. It gives us some information before that we can process, and I think it will help structure our conversations a little bit more. So thank you all for the effort to give us that stuff beforehand. So is this going to be you, Jamie?
This is me.
Okay, great. So each presenter has 10 minutes, and then we have some time for questions at the end. Go ahead.
So, again, I'm Jamie Cody with Bluegrass Care Navigators with the Medical Respite Program. So we provide a short-term hotel medical respite program here in Fayette County for those who would otherwise discharge home but are too ill or too frail to recover from an acute illness on the street or in the shelter. so we want to provide a safe, supportive place for them to recover and provide that care coordination and promote optimal health outcomes. So we began planning for that safe discharge from the time we received the referral, involving, of course, the participant, any hospital or shelter staff or healthcare entities that are involved in the individual's care. And our goal is to transition them safely to either a shelter or a temporary or permanent housing once they are released from medical respite. So it's a short-term stay. We do accept referrals 24/7. And then we have an on-call number for individuals who are in the respite program where they can call if they have an urgent or after-hours need as well. So we use a hotel medical respite model and provide food, transportation to medical appointments, coordinate care, of course, with healthcare providers, and we can provide nursing and social work visits as needed throughout their stay. So the data in here is from January through December of 2022. So our target was to serve 180 persons, and our actual was 248. Of those, a pretty even mix between male and female, 96 male, 104 female, and then 47 children. I won't read through all of those demographics. I know you have those in front of you, but just to hit on some of the highlights, we served 33 veterans. Just over 60% as far as race goes were white, 31% black, and then almost 7% a combination of the other races listed there on the sheet. The average length of stay for someone in medical respite is approximately 10 days. We serve individuals since the pandemic started who are isolated due to COVID as well. So largely, if that person is returning to a congregate setting, the health department requires a 10-day isolation. If they're going to housing or an individual setting, it would be 5 days. For our general medical respite patients, so those may be surgical patients, individuals who maybe have a wound that is healing or a drain, something like that. Sometimes that stay can be a bit longer than that. So our goal, of course, is to discharge them from medical respite to a safe setting. Many of ours discharged to a shelter. We did have, just in looking at their discharge disposition, we had 28 that either declined a referral to a shelter and opted to discharge to street or car. So that's an area that we continue to focus on and really working with those individuals. Many of those came to us as a hospital referral that were in the ER from the street and were returning there. So that was their intent. But of course, continuing to work with those individuals to try to connect them with emergency shelter or other settings. We did have 9 that discharged to substance use treatment facilities, which is great. So either residential or inpatient treatment facilities for substance use disorder, and 1 that went to a sober living environment, and then 10 that went to permanent housing. So again, focusing on trying to get them to a safe setting on discharge. Like I said, we do accept referrals 24/7, and individuals have access to that 24/7 number if they have needs that arise after hours. It's not included here, but as far as those removed for rule violations, I looked back during this reporting period, and we had 3 individuals, so 1.2%. 2 of those were because of damage to hotel property within the room. And then 1 was in with COVID isolation and repeatedly was not adhering to the isolation guidelines and was asked by the hotel, unfortunately, to leave. But we do have a good partnership with the hotel. They work with us. If we have a client who is not adhering, they'll, we'll reinforce the expectations and, hopefully avoid those situations. As far as ongoing evaluation and improvement, at BCN we've really focused on strengthening our DEI initiatives this past year. We've hired 2 full-time DEI managers, one of those specifically focused on Fayette County. Here, I won't read through all of that. Other things that have really impacted our medical respite program, we are partnered with UK's Healing Community Study to work with individuals with opioid use disorder to help link and retain them in treatment. So that has been a really great program and opportunity to increase our staff training. So we have a specific team that works in that program, but we're able to consult with them if we have an individual, for instance, that needs to be linked to treatment to help, get them into the right resources, make sure they have, Narcan, provide overdose education, those types of things. So we've begun training all of our team outside of our work with HEAL, which is huge, but all of our transitional care team members on the use of non-stigmatizing language and really trying to connect patients who come to us with substance use disorder with treatment if they're inclined, and make sure they have transportation to those appointments and follow-up. Other than that, of course, just a lot of collaboration with healthcare providers. A campaign to secure donations for personal care and food items, things like that. Children's activities for those, especially those in isolation. As far as challenges, really, sometimes our program focus is on individuals who have acute medical needs that need a short-term recovery, and sometimes we'll receive referrals on individuals who really their medical issues are more chronic in nature, and while certainly not saying they wouldn't benefit from a medical respite stay, but the need is really more for housing, and sometimes those referral sources may be, having difficulty finding a safe discharge environment for that individual. So that's one thing that we really navigate and just focus on those that need that acute medical respite. And then, of course, the pandemic. Are we ever going to stop saying that? 83% of our referrals this past year were due to COVID isolation needs. So huge, still making a huge impact on that. And then I'll just finish up with a quick, sharing a quick story about, not really a story because it's a true story, but a 75-year-old male veteran that came to us who was experiencing homelessness. He had been in a rehab facility for physical rehab for over 70 days after having an above-the-knee amputation. He had developed a wound that required a wound vac, which had just been removed the week prior. They were looking for a safe discharge place for him. He still needed wound care 3 times a week, had nowhere safe to return to. So we were able to put him in a medical respite stay. We anticipated about a 10 to 14 stay to help facilitate wound care. Got home health. They were coming in 3 times a week to provide wound care. Of course, providing food and transportation. And at one point, the client was like, I don't think I need to go back to my physician's appointments. I'm good. And so we had to kind of overcome that barrier, worked with the client. And he did adhere to his appointments and treatment plan, did really well, and then worked with the VA homeless outreach team, and ultimately he discharged to permanent housing after a 16-day stay. So 3 days after Christmas too, which was pretty great. So just one example of just the collaboration and coordination that really ended up with a great outcome for that gentleman. So I will stop there, and if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take a stab at answering them.
Questions from anyone?
I just had one question. I'm not asking for a name or names or locations, but I assume you use just one hotel for...
We do. We have 2 that we can use. We have one that we primarily use here in Fayette County. Yes.
Thank you.
Do you have a card with your email?
Yes.
Just in case someone in the jail comes across this issue, because I'm the reentry coordinator, so they will call me to ask me different things in that aspect. I haven't had any, but I'd rather be prepared than not.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely happy to.
Thank you.
Other questions? Jeff?
One was partially comment, partially question. I really appreciate that you all do try to focus when someone comes through that has substance use disorder, that you're looking at trying to make those connections. Do you all have good connections to be able to identify and connect people with sober living beds if they express an interest?
We do, and that most of that really really is part of our work with HEAL. We had specific navigators that worked within Fayette County, so that really we've kind of built our own internal resource guide, and there's also a resource guide through there that has some options, but we're always open to new resources.
I was just going to suggest, like, right across the hall from us is Amy Baker in Social Services, and her office can also help support if you have difficulty locating a bed for someone. They've been a great resource for our office when we've had those situations where that's really more the type of environment someone needs at the moment than standard housing. And they've been great at supporting us and identifying those options.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
I can get you contact info if you need it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Other questions? I have one quick one. It looked like your target was 180, but you had 248 people come through. That's a big difference. So how were you able to make those accommodations, or like, do you have kind of a sense of why it's so much larger? Like, it's positive that you were able to help so many people, but I was just kind of wondering.
Yeah, so the last 2 years consistently, we've been above 200. The pandemic, hugely a part of that. Also, I think more people are aware and familiar with our different healthcare and community service partners and providers in the community are more aware. How have we made it work? And some of those are families, right? So they're in one room together. Also, when we can, we will try to cohort individuals. So especially if, say, a couple have COVID from a shelter and are coming in. It's also great company if you're quarantined for 10 days in a hotel room, and a good use of funding as well. So we just try to do the best we can and serve as many as we can.
Well, that's great. And then my other question was about average length of stay. So you said some of your quarantine is based on 10 days. What's the kind of range that you see on that average?
So a lot of medical respite programs have a longer length of stay, sometimes 30, 60 days. And of course, the longer, the better options you can to navigate some of the other needs and secure housing. But this is more of a short-term medical respite stay. So generally, we're looking at individuals. Of course, people have to be able to manage themselves independently in a hotel room. Or if they have a caregiver, in the room that can assist them, that type of thing. But generally, 7 to 14 days. We do have individuals who, come in and we expect it to be that and maybe have to extend it a week. Maybe they go back to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, they have this surgical drain. I need one more week. It's, still draining. We couldn't take it out as planned. So there are times when it would need to be extended.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other
Thank
questions or comments for Jamie? Moving to the next presentation, there's two presentations by Community Action Council, and I should have read out the whole title for you, Jamie. I apologize for that. But the first presentation will be from the Domestic Violence Bonus Initiative Rapid Rehousing Program. This is a COC program. Marty, are you presenting for us today?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, great. Well, take it away for the first one.
Okay. Well, the Domestic Violence Bonus Initiative, or as we refer to it as DVBI, we partner with Greenhouse 17 to provide rapid rehousing and supportive services to individuals and households that are actively fleeing domestic violence. As far as the goals of the program, they sort of align with the HUD performance measures. So when we're looking at that, we're looking at how quickly we can move clients into housing once they're determined eligible for the program, help them provide supports and obtain income and resources so that they can exit the program successfully into permanent housing. And then because it was funded through a specific funding opportunity through the NOFO process, through the COC, we do only serve those victims of domestic violence, and that's just a funding requirement for the funding. If you look at the target and the actuals, our numbers were lower than anticipated. Some of the challenges that we've had, one would just be some turnover among staff, both with Community Action Council and the case managers with Greenhouse 17. And it just, sometimes it just takes, in terms of staff turning over, and then becoming acclimated to the position and working with that. I think, especially with new case managers, I think sometimes it takes about a year or so before they're fully comfortable with rapid rehousing. And so it just kind of, makes the process as participants enter and exit the program in terms of reaching the numbers that we want to achieve. We did have, as far as the number of households served, we were closer to the target than the number of persons served, but I think that was just because we had more individuals and smaller households than what we had projected within our application. As far as the demographics, we did serve, not surprisingly, mainly females. We did have one male and two who identified as transgender. And as far as the race and ethnicity, it was mainly non-Hispanic, and it was almost an even breakdown between black and then versus black or other races. As far as the outcomes go, just looking at the Lexington COC's target versus how we perform with the program, the length of stay should be the time it takes to housing. Sorry, that's a typo. We're trying to get someone housed. The goal is to have someone housed within 30 days from project entry. The average for us was around 85 days. 30 days is really hard. That's a really ambitious goal. So, but 85. In general, if we can get someone housed in less than 9 days, then we're that's a pretty good outcome. We did have 93% that exited the permanent housing. Of those that have exited the program, I started too late on the presentation, so I didn't have time to get the data from the Office of Homelessness, but there wasn't anyone when I checked in HMIS for those who exited that had any other entries after their exit, as far as I could tell. We did have one family that we did end up putting into a hotel over the very cold snap around Christmas, but that was because they had lost heat in their housing, so they were able to return to the house once that was repaired. As far as income, we did have some of those that gained income upon exit. Those that stayed had not yet had gained or increased their income. And then, just talking about challenges, I did mention the staff turnover being a factor, and just the time it takes for someone to orient to supportive housing and housing first, but also just I think it's been highlighted in a lot of other meetings, just the housing market currently. It can definitely be a challenge in terms of getting this housed. And as far as process and how we go about looking at our performance and also trying to troubleshoot or improve, we do review our measures in HMIS to see how we're doing in terms of exits from housing, how we're doing with income, how long it's taking for those to move from referral into housing. We also have a monthly meeting with Greenhouse 17, and Allison's usually participating on that, where we kind of discuss the different clients in the program. We talk about cases, try to address challenges that may pop up just with any supportive housing program, and try to address those and improve as we can. And then just in terms of diversity, I think it's been mentioned on other presentations, but we do have an officer of diversity, equity, and inclusion who's made some measures between action as far as an agency. With that, we also, as a housing department, are in the process of developing a way to better obtain client feedback for improving program performance. That's pretty much what I had. So, if anybody has any questions,
I'll open it up for questions.
I have one.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, obviously, the length of stay a little bit longer than our target. I was wondering, how much of that do you think is attributed mostly to just challenges with the overall housing market, and how much of that is really more of a reflection of the population that you serve in terms of things like safety concerns and mitigating the consequences of previous experiences of abuse. Like, I know that can be a situation where someone might have previous evictions, damage to their credit, financial abuse. Just wondering if there's any sense of how much of that is actually the population served versus the housing market.
I don't know that you could say like it's 50-50 or 40-60. I mean, obviously the housing market is part of that. I think it's always if you're working in this field, there's always going to be challenges for housing as far as background checks and other specific things and based on the, on an individual basis, there's always challenges that occur. So I'm not sure which one would be more, which would occur more. I think they both are challenges, and I think that's true though for any rapid rehousing program or permanent supportive housing program. You're going to face challenges. I don't know that I can answer that. I'm not sure if Allison has any more insight into some of the challenges. I know that you are more on the ground and doing that.
I will say that everything you just mentioned, we've definitely come up against in this housing program and our other housing programs too.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say how much, like you said, like percentages wise, but like I can think of one person we have right now that's been pulled for 4 months, and it seems like every time we like have a plan to get her to sign a lease, like something happens because she's like fleeing DV actively. So like that's kind of an example of how domestic violence definitely affects that.
Yeah.
And then we have other people too who have like past evictions or like owe old money because they were in a domestic violence situation, had to flee, and then they didn't have an EPO at the time, so they couldn't take that to court. So that kind of stuff does pop up a lot.
Because in fairness to you all, I think we do set some different performance targets in our annual COC competition for programs that specifically serve domestic violence victims. And in the handout materials, I think since you're the only program it applies to for length of that document, okay. I think I may have left that off. But if I'm not mistaken, I think you may have 60 days as your target instead of 30. I'll research that just to make sure as we go through this process in the future that we're holding you to the right measure. But I also kind of just want that input from you all as you're serving a challenging population. If there are some considerations as we establish benchmarks that we need to be considering, I definitely want that input so we can consider that.
Where it says average time to move in is 368 days, I think that's like that seems like a lot to me, because it's more than a year. That's an average. Am I reading that right? That could be me.
I don't see that in ours.
I've seen on like the top of the second page, or this.
I think either, and Jeff might be correct if I'm wrong. I know when we're looking at the days from program entry to housing, it seems like the APR may be calculated based on the time from, I don't, internet coordinated entry, I'm not sure.
I do recall that we identified one length of stay between enrollment and move-in that was really lengthy. I don't want to say that's about the time frame there was, and it definitely impacted your overall average. But I'm not sure if we were ever able to identify if there was any kind of like H-minus data entry issues or anything that might have impacted it.
Can we talk just briefly about that number of like the target number? So I know on this document we have it says 30, but then you're suggesting 60, and you even mentioned that you kind of try to do 90 or less is what you like to see. So could you just like for my education clarify like who sets those numbers? Like do we set that as a group, or is it based on like a federal standard? Or
so that's going to be a national benchmark, the 30 days for rapid rehousing. There's a little bit more clear national benchmarks for rapid rehousing than permanent supportive housing. When I started this work many years ago, for PSH projects, there were also established national benchmarks, but a lot of those have kind of disappeared over the years. I think partially because the PSH model has changed so much, where people have embraced housing first and coordinated entry, and so they recognize that now those programs are serving such a high acuity population. It's kind of hard to put a specific target, but the national benchmark for rapid rehousing, which has been the benchmark for numerous years, has been 30 days, since it is something that's supposed to quickly rehouse persons. We and our competitions have always, for DV programs, set different scoring criteria. Sometimes it's the same measure, but sometimes we will give a higher threshold because we are accounting for the population. So for example, with returns to homelessness, we understand that domestic violence is cyclical, and so it's more likely that those persons or households are going to potentially return to homelessness, because there may be situations where maybe they get involved in another relationship that's abusive. Maybe their perpetrator locates them and somehow it causes them to be displaced temporarily from housing. So we do sometimes set separate measures, and that's probably an oversight on my part for not including that in the handout that I gave to help everyone prepare their presentations. I'm got a note to make that adjustment.
And I will say, I mean, that's always our goal is under 30 days, but I also know realistically, like if we're not hitting 30 days, I'm not like pulling my hair out. If it goes over 90 days, then we're like, you know,
That's what I was wondering, like,
yeah.
is the 90 days based on your typical experience?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the
like if
one
we
you're
can do
holding
under
your
90, then that's typically, then, you know, realistically, that's pretty good. If we start to go over 90, then that's when it gets a little.
I think really it's a
worrisome.
disconnect between a measure that was established pre-COVID and now that's really hard to achieve within the context of our current housing market.
Okay, any other questions for Marty on this program? I think the next one that you have for us, Marty, is the Community Action Council Emergency Family Housing, and this is through our Extended Social Resource Program.
Yeah, so emergency family housing, or EFH, sort of we use a scattered site model to provide non-congregate shelter to families who are experiencing homelessness who may not be able to access existing shelters without separating. So that can include, you know, families with children. It can include same-sex households or multi-generational households. And then obviously we are working to try to, you know, help those families obtain housing as quickly as possible. Once we, you know, are able to get them into shelter, and then try to help them access as quickly as possible. But we do, as I mentioned, we do serve a variety of populations, but we do prioritize families with children. And in terms of the families that we do prioritize, we would prioritize within that, prioritizing those families with younger children over others. So in terms of the targets, we were a little under in terms of the households served and the number of persons served. We did have, it seems like the last year or two, I don't know if it's a COVID-related thing, but just some of the households that we've served have been much larger in size than we anticipated. We've had several that have been, you know, households of 7 or 8 or 9 individuals. So it's been, sometimes that's a challenge to get them to house larger families. And it, you know, that impacts us too as far as like the housing units that we have. We do have a limited number of units that we can utilize, and so helping the families move on from those units into permanent housing. Sometimes there's some turnover time too, because even once they leave those housing, then we do have to have the units cleaned. Sometimes repairs have to be made and things so that we can make them ready for the next family. In terms of the gender for adults, it was, you know, 19 females, 13 males. Gender of children, a few more males than females. The, you know, majority of the population were white. We did have, you know, 18 black and 3 others, and most were non-Hispanic. So our average length of stay, obviously, our target is 30 days. You know, that would be, again, tied to the HUD performance standards. But looking at, we, you know, would like to have them, ultimately the goal is to have them in and out of shelter within 30 days. You know, and looking at the average stay for leavers, put mean and median on there, because sometimes the mean, with the mean, there's some outliers that bring the numbers up. So it was 115 days. If you look at the average for the median, it was 50 days. As far as exiting the permanent housing, we did have 90% that exited permanent housing. In terms of gaining employment or increased income, they didn't increase income while in the program, but we did have, over half that did have income at exit, so that's important, especially if they don't have a subsidy to maintain their housing. And then we did have all or provided case management services. Each family, we do have a full-time case manager who works with each family. And the percentage as far as rules violations was 6% that were removed, and I think looking back at it, it may have been, I don't think it was the entire family. I think it may have been a household member or two that were asked to leave for I don't remember the exact reason, but it was may have been related to probably more likely than not damages to the unit or something like that. So some of the challenges we face, I mentioned turning over the units. One of the other ones too is helping the families or keeping the families motivated to move on to permanent housing, because sometimes they may start to see it as their housing unit if they're in an apartment. And we just want to stress the importance that this is not your ultimate destination. We want to help you get to a place that you can call your own. And then just working with with families is a little more complex than working with individuals. Invariably, we only find out a lot about the families, a lot more about the families the longer we work with them. So, there are things that do pop up, like, CPS involvement, sometimes, a lot of times substance use, and sometimes there's instances of domestic violence that may not be apparent at first. And so that does complicate the services that we provide. Similar to the domestic violence bonus initiative, we do look at performance measures in HMIS. We also hold we meet weekly as a staff and just discuss the cases and families that we're currently working with in the program to try to address any challenges or anything that may be happening with them that are preventing them from moving on to permanent housing.
Okay, we'll open up the questions.
I'm the beau of the group today. So I was going to ask about your employment and income measure. I see you recorded 0% as the outcome, but noted that 52% had income at exit. Does that mean that they entered with income and then maintained it, but they didn't necessarily gain or increase?
So it just shows the zero because with HUD and the way HMIS works, somebody measures if they gained or increased income, and we had some of that.
So that 60%, is that, this is more educational for myself, but is that a standard of like someone coming in that does not have employment? Like 60% of those who come in who don't have employment the goal is for those individuals to leave with employment? Or is it just like you'd mentioned 50% came in, you know what I'm saying? Like, does that 50% doesn't go towards, unfortunately, that 60?
Right. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not aware of there being a national benchmark for shelter programs specifically around increase in income, but for like our COC programs that are permanent housing, there are established benchmarks that during the time that they're in the program, we would assist them in either generating or increasing both employment income and non-employment income. The thought being that as they exit the program, they're going to have a greater chance of success if they are able to increase those things during the time that they have the benefit of the program and make it less likely that there's going to be returns to homelessness. And I think for most of our shelter programs, that would have been a measure that you all probably included in your initial application.
I think it was application, and being just with the nature and design of the program, it's a little different than, say, the Hope Center Salvation Army. I think to have that measure for them would probably be a little unrealistic. It's hard enough for us as being a smaller shelter, but we wanted to include that in there because it is, like Jeff was saying, it's an important factor in successfully maintaining their housing once they leave the program.
And so when it comes to self-identified goals, we've had several instances where we found that sometimes the language impacts whether or not you meet the measure. I think back in like December or October when Arbor presented one of their programs, they had identified the same thing, that they said something around, I think it might have been obtaining education or employment. And if they had worded it maintained, they would have met the measure, but because it was stated obtained, they did not.
Thank you.
I apologize if I missed this, but what is the average size of the families? Because you said it was hard to house the larger families, but what's like the average size that you're typically working?
I don't know that right offhand. I probably could determine that. I mean, I guess the easy way would be to just divide the number of persons served by the number of households, and it would come up with probably an average size.
So like the three-ish.
It's about almost 4.8.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because the target would have been for 3, but the actual would have been like 4.8.
Any other questions for this program? Okay, thank you, Marty. Okay. David, take it away. The first one we have is the men's emergency shelter through our extended social resource program.
This is
Well, I'm timing you, so.
it's not even working. You all know basically what the emergency shelter is all about here. Our goal is to serve individuals, adult males 18 and over, who are experiencing homelessness. So, hold on, I can't do too much.
Is there something that will change the input on the TV?
Yeah,
Because I think that's what it is.
Or if you just plug it in again, and it may register.
So, yeah.
Or we can just watch Gross.
We can just watch that.
It's funny.
Not touching. So, let's see. Turn off, turn back on. Does that work sometimes? It is. Well, I'm doing that. So we provide emergency shelter, food, clothing, just sort of basic necessities to individuals experiencing homelessness, adult men. All of our clients meet with our intake staff, who do just sort of a basic demographic assessment.
You had it on the, when you hit the thing to switch the.
All of our clients have just a basic demographic assessment. We assess them for the needs, essentially why they ended up becoming homeless. Sorry. There. Let's see if that'll work. We're getting there. So, what we're doing is providing access to meals, clothing, basic needs. Just not gonna have. You all have it here.
It's cool.
It's fun. So, we're applying for SNAP benefits. We are connecting people with coordinated entry, doing housing assessments, meeting all those basic needs for our population. A large part of what we're doing is making referrals to other community agencies. I've been a big fan of the idea that if it exists somewhere else, we don't necessarily need to do it. We just need to be able to plug into it. And when we run a pretty minimal staff, so we do a lot of that. Number of people seen over the past, this funding period was 1696. Looking back over last year, that was nearly double what the prior year's number was. So you think what was different, COVID was different. Over the course of the last year, we reduced a lot of the restrictions that we had previously had. So y'all don't have to like look behind me. What we had done is reduce a lot of the COVID restrictions. We no longer require people to be vaccinated to stay on site. We no longer require a lot of the testing. We just have different alternatives for people depending on what is going on with them. So our number drastically increased this year. We also didn't have the requirements for social distancing that we had before. A little more lax on that. 161 veterans, 335 chronic homeless. So those numbers are going up. Average length of stay, 7 days for leavers, 53 for stayers. By and large, people leave quickly within probably the first 2 days. Our real challenge is the people who stick around. We'll talk about that in a minute. 52% of people who came in and met with intake, so those who stayed more than just overnight, did meet with our program staff, which means 48% just walked through the door, they slept, and then they left. The way we're set up is that our clients will meet with intake the next business day after they come in. So that just shows how many people are super transient and just barely touch the shelter. And as you all know, we because of our geographic location, Lexington, not the Hope Center, we have a lot of people that are coming in for hospitals, for Greyhound. So we have a lot of people who are just passing through to somewhere else. And I think that really shows when we're looking at the numbers. Increase in employment? Nothing. No, zero. Like, it just isn't a thing that really happens. 89 individuals with earned income, increase with earned income, 1,257 reported no income. So it's just not, it is definitely something that we need to work on. We've always needed to work on it. It has been a challenge for us. One of the big challenges with that over the past year is that a lot of our people who were employed had to leave jobs because of COVID restrictions. Because we're in a congregate setting, we had a person in one of our dorms that got COVID. The entire dorm was locked down. So that meant people losing jobs. We have done some things since then to kind of get creative. We learned from our mistakes and started housing people who are employed together, like groups in different places. But it has really been a challenge for some of those folks. And like I said, with vaccines and just some changes and things that we've done, that isn't really a problem now. We could still have a mass outbreak of COVID and that would change things, but it wouldn't the same way it did. You know, the day we found out we had 68 people in the Hope Center who had COVID. Like, that, when you're dealing with like 150 people or so and half your people have it, it's kind of crazy. Exits to permanent housing with returns over the 2 years prior was 49, 14% returned less than 6 months. 6 to 12 months was 8% and 2% after a year. The longer people stay out, obviously, the better chance they have at not coming back. The racial breakdown, 72% white, 23% African American, and then 4% multi-race, and then just 1% other people, 5% Hispanic. So a very small Hispanic population. In terms of percent of households removed for rule violations, 130 people, 7%. The formatting on this is a little tricky. I don't want to be confusing. It was just like messed up. I did not include in that 130 people the sex offenders and medically inappropriate. So that they weren't restricted for rule violations. Some of them never made it to us. They're on the books. Some of them were referred, and we checked to verify if they're on the registry and we put them on the list. But some of those people never made it to us or were referred from hospitals. And to be honest, I can't really tell who ended up in shelter and who didn't based on that. So 130 people for rule violations, and then those other people who are on restriction but are not on rule violations. One of the challenges that we faced is that restriction list being low barrier. Over the course of the year, we completely revamped our restriction policy. I know you all heard hopes to restrict everybody. We hear that too. So we completely revamped that and cut out a lot of the restricted reasons people are going to be restricted. Now, if people are going to be restricted, it's going to be for things like violence or, selling drugs on property, or the sex offender medically inappropriate. Those are the big things that we're looking for. We cut out a lot of the minor violations where people were restricted for coming in intoxicated. Like they can just come back later when they're not intoxicated. Like that didn't need to be. And so we just changed a lot. And so that did cut down a lot this year on the number of people that we restricted. And that was done towards the end of the year, so I think really that will be reflected going forward into next year. But the time had come for that. There were a lot of things that we did because we've done them before, and it was just good to not do anymore. Also issues with just tracking people who have employment income changes. People don't want to report that stuff to us. We also changed how that is reflected, and we don't charge rent for people unless they have entitlements, and that's so they can keep their entitlements. So unless they have disability or Social Security income or something that they may lose because they're not paying us, we're not charging rent any longer. So none of the dollar a day stuff. Part of that was so people wouldn't be afraid to report employment income to us, because we really have struggled with people just not wanting to tell us. We also moved all their employment clients into one dorm, try to increase the amount of access to services that they have had. One of the things that we've also done over the past year to address some of the challenges of getting people jobs, getting people into housing, is we allow people to stay during the day now. We're not kicking people out at 8 o'clock in the morning. That way we can work with them. They can work with our caseworkers. They can work with the employment people on getting jobs, or work with our housing folks on finding housing. So we're just trying to deal with some of those things. Our big issues, Jamie mentioned it, the chronic health issues. We have a population that is getting older and that is getting sicker, and we don't know what to do with them. Since I've been in here, there have been 3 or 4 emails about clients who aren't medically appropriate for us, but we don't know what else to do with them. So we're trying the best we can to figure that out, just like everybody else. And there really isn't a good system for meeting the needs of that particular group. It is a struggle. And like I said, I don't know what to do about it. We do some participant feedback studies. Honestly, I don't get a lot of those back. Most of what I get are people coming into my office with complaints. That is mostly what I get. We put those surveys out, and nobody ever fills them out. We do have a grievance process that's posted, so we get a lot of that. In terms of just the overall outcomes, I think I hit all of those. If you have any questions about those, I'm happy to answer that. Some of the sort of performance improvement stuff that we're doing, I already talked about, trying to address some of the issues with employment and housing. One of the huge concerns is the lack of affordable housing. It is a problem every single day. People who have evictions, people who have terrible felony records, people who have not a lot of income. We have people who get Social Security income and they're $800 a month, but also have half of it that goes to child support. So it is a challenge. When you look at the number of people that are referred through coordinated entry, that's relatively low when you consider the overall population that we have. So we can't rely on just those vouchers. We have to get creative with trying to find other ways to help our clients get out from the shelter. And we've started taking, I know I'm running a short time, but taking a more targeted focus on some of the guys that have stayed a long time and trying to work one at a time, getting those people out. We've had some good success. People that have been in the shelter since I came to the shelter, who we have now housed. And so I think that is an approach that seems to be working, and we will continue going forward. Questions about that?
Questions for David on this program?
Not a question, just a comment. I really do appreciate the steps that you guys have taken to be lower barrier. I have seen that in action throughout the last several months when I've been in this role. You guys have been a lot more flexible on restrictions. I think allowing people to stay during daytime hours is a huge benefit to actually moving progress forward on permanent housing, employment, other areas. So really just wanted to give you guys credit for that. It's made a huge difference.
And it's a big deal to me, and it's like one of those things that I think whatever we're doing, we need to be doing whatever is in the best interest of the clients, and just like kicking them to the street for most of the day and then not giving them any case management wasn't doing anything for any of us. So it's just one of those things that just doesn't work for our community anymore. So,
David, what if people are, well, of course, homeless, but like, what if they come to you with court cases and just general baggage pertaining to courts? How do y'all do that?
we have a lot of individuals in our shelter that have legal issues, and you know, we will help them through that the best we can. Our caseworkers will work with them to try to figure out what we can do to help. We can give them bus passes to make sure they get to court. Or, you know, back in the video arraignment days, we had everybody everywhere was on video with somebody in court or a doctor or something. So we try our best to accommodate that. We do have a lot of that. A lot of people. I'm always writing letters to judges. Like, it's just a thing that we have to do a lot. We have a lot of people that are in home incarceration right now, and are, you know, their home is the shelter. Those people can't go very far, so they can't go out during the day. So yeah, it is a challenge that we face, and many times it's just helping them get through the legal process, helping them figure out how to meet whatever terms of their probation. Some of them have to find work, and so we help them find work, or just, you know, whatever it is that they have to do.
Does it matter if they're from Lexington? Can they be from surrounding counties?
Yeah, we generally, we won't take referrals outside of Fayette County. We haven't since COVID. Somebody shows up at the door, we're going to take them. But like hospitals or jails or prisons call and want to send somebody from Louisville, stay in Louisville, we don't need you here. we just don't have the resources here to house everybody. So we have really made an effort over the last couple of years. And I think COVID opened our eyes to that, to focus on the Fayette County homeless population.
Thank you.
We're not turning people away if they show up at the door, though. So that just...
My office takes a similar standpoint. When we get those calls, we do the same thing. If someone's calling from Louisville, Cincinnati, much further areas sometimes, I try to encourage them, if you don't have an identified plan, it's probably best to stay where you already have familiarity, potential resources, connections. If they show up, we're going to figure out a solution.
One question about how the restrictions have been lowered. I also appreciate that. How do people find out about that if they were previously not allowed? Is it kind of something that just kind of trickles through the population and they just kind of tell each other? Or?
And we have a lot of people who call to check on restrictions or to appeal restrictions, and a lot of what we get is like through outreach, people who think they're restricted, and we're able to tell them, no, you're no longer restricted. But a lot of that comes from people calling to like appeal, or in terms of appeal, we have a pretty liberal appeal process. That number is not 130 now, it's actually 126. 4 of the people that are on that list have been lifted since I did this presentation, just because like a lot of times when factors change for people over time, and you know, you had somebody who was, you know, in active addiction and using drugs on property, and they were restricted, and they're sober now and doing well and doing the things they need to do. We'll lift that, you know. So a lot of it is people calling, or us having other interaction with them through other systems that we have. Through the jail program or through
With our emergency weather motel program, we try to focus on those that don't have another shelter option available. So Dustin and Jason usually will help us to check as we identify those persons. And a lot of times we've been able to find that now, after they've revamped that list and that process, we're able to inform them they don't have a restriction, and that's oftentimes the solution.
Any other questions for this program? Okay, your next presentation for the Hope Center is street outreach, and this is through the Emergency Solutions Grant.
Let me first say, this was supposed to be a really short-term program. It's supposed to be over a year and a half ago. So when we're talking about outcomes, when I made these outcomes, it was largely with the idea that we're just going to be like less than a year. We have 2 people on our outreach team, Dustin and Jason back here behind me. They do an amazing job, by the way. And their job is to engage with people who are unsheltered, living in encampments, cars, just generally people who are homeless but not engaged with the shelter system. So they do a lot of work just reaching out to people based on calls from Jeff or calls from the police, parks, code enforcement. So a lot of coordinating with other people in the community who are likely to find homeless encampments. Just everyday people that contact you all. That's how we find out about people. And their job is to make contact with them and try to engage them in services. Coordinating a lot with Marty's team and the rescue missions team to make sure we're not redundant and duplicating services. Getting them screened for housing, VSPDATs, just providing whatever services they need in the moment. And a lot of that is crisis support. A lot of that is people who are unsheltered, and we can provide shelter, or we can refer them to like a hotel program in the winter, or we can get them food or clothes. So a lot of it is just crisis oriented. Engaging, trying to connect with that unsheltered population, which is undoubtedly growing. And again, most of that is coming from referrals from the community. And, a good amount of it is just people that we know. So our initial target was to attempt to work with 20 individuals a week. I'm not really sure how that plays out across the year, but FY23, we made contact with 286 people. 12 veterans, 137 chronic, which is definitely a higher proportion of chronic homeless than we saw in the emergency shelter. So I think that is worth noting. The people on the streets have, by and large, been there a while. 191 men, 93 female, and 2 transgender. You see the population breakdown there. 5 youth. We have a lot of interaction, or a lot of Arbor contacts a lot of those people as well. So, and let's see. The race and ethnicity, 231 of those were white, 40 black, 4 American Indian, and 1 Native Hawaiian. I don't know. What are they doing here? It seems like a mistake. 10 multi-race and 7 were Hispanic. So I think Dustin has already topped that for this year with just on the night of the point in time count with the Hispanic population. So, but again, the Hispanic population is underrepresented. I think that is definitely the case. And I'm not taking credit for this. I'm just saying there are 97 clients on coordinated entry that we made contact with in street outreach. My hunch is that most of those came from Marty's outreach folks, but we do have a lot of collaboration between those 2 groups. And so 97 of our clients are currently on outreach or on coordinated entry. Percentage of participants with new and increased income, 3% for stayers, 5% for leavers. So a negligible amount And then the same, about 3% with increased non-cash benefits. So just not a lot of that. And I think our guys have made more of an effort over the winter to do a little more of that stuff with some of the clients as we refer them to the hotel programs. That's sort of a learning thing. That's one of the things that we've figured out since doing this is like when you have a captive audience, we can do more things with them. So trying to engage them when they're in the programs and when we're referring them to those programs. One of the challenges has just been, like I said, we started with the idea that this is going to be a short-term program. So when I'm planning for street outreach, I didn't really know that we were going to be going on this long. And I'm glad for it. I think it's something that I'm pretty passionate about, and the guys back there are certainly passionate about it and good at their jobs. And I think they've done a tremendous job of kind of successfully engaging a lot of people in our community. The original plan here was that because so many people were on the streets because of COVID, we needed more support out there. That was before the hotel project, and that was before a lot of things changed in our community around what street homelessness looked like. Tracking is a challenge because of coordination between the outreach teams. It is hard to figure out who's doing what sometimes in HMIS. So again, I can't tell which of those coordinated entry clients came from us. It really doesn't matter. And just the challenge of working with the clients on the streets. Many clients don't want our help. They don't want services from us. So, you have to try again. You have to try to maintain contact with people who don't want to talk to you or don't want you in their house. And you have to continue to work with them to stay engaged. Also, when we're out telling people they're going to get kicked out of their camps, they're not happy to see us. So you face a lot of that too with, meeting with code enforcement and saying, hey man, they're going to clear out your camp. You kind of have to deal with the fallout of that when people really aren't happy to see you because they know that means they're going to be kicked out. But what we do to work around that is try to connect them with as many services as we can to make sure they end up in someplace better, end up in shelter, end up in just a place where they're not going to get kicked out, to be honest. So, I don't know. This program is difficult in that we don't have more staff. If we had more people, we could do a lot more services, but having 2 people to contact 283 people is a big ordeal. So I think that's one of the challenges as well, just again because of the short-term nature of the original plan. And the funding was extended, for a lot of these COVID-related grants, the shelter being the same until August of this year. So we were continued what was supposed to be, Jeff, do you remember when it was supposed to end?
I feel like there were 2 deadline extensions for expenditures from HUD. This most recent one, I think, pushed us from maybe like March to technically the end is September, but LFECG builds 1 month for us to process all expenses. And before that, I think originally it was going to be like September of the previous year. Yeah. And there's still a possibility that we may find that it's extended again.
Yeah. So we're going to keep kicking that can down the road.
I know here in LFECG, we still have some programs that haven't been able to fully expend within HUD's guidelines. And the other thing is a lot of people propose to do things that have proven difficult on some of the timelines. Now, we did get extensions, but when we originally had proposals of, for example, purchasing vehicles with the supply chain, we had to deny some of those requests because at the time, if the deadline was September, you were telling us that you wanted to do this in, maybe spring, there was possibly going to be an issue with you being able to get something like a specialized van, a truck. So there's been a lot of funds that have been not easy to spend down, and I imagine there's other communities that have had those challenges. I actually just had a conversation with the health department the other day that they have some COVID funds that the money has been extended. We're looking to see to try to connect them. Maybe they can give some funds to medical respite since we're still seeing a high amount of cases. So we're hopeful that that might be possible. But knowing realistically that we have 2 street outreach teams that have funding that's scheduled to end here in the calendar year, that's why our board has thankfully made a priority to make sure that there's continued funding for street outreach.
We have made efforts to be frugal with that money, so it will extend as long as that money will go. And it is fairly restrictive in what you can pay for with the money. So a lot of things that we originally planned to spend the money on weren't things that we could actually get paid for. So it ends up just being, staff. And so we've been able to drag that out to try to continue this as long as that funding, as long as they'll let us. And I love street outreach. I hope it continues indefinitely. So.
David, is it possible to, some of the people that come from the jail Hope Center, instead of them going back on the streets, or well, I know they still continue in the Hope Center program, but can you hire them to add on to these gentlemen over here to where you could increase the outreach?
We talked about the possibility of adding staff, but I think the indefinite time frame, it was hard to hire someone not knowing if they'll have a job for, now 6 months. So that was, we've had that conversation a couple of times, but the threat of not knowing how long it will continue has been an issue. And now we're at the point that the money that we have will get us through the end of this year, maybe a little bit longer, but probably not through probably not enough left for an entire other staff person.
And for the street outreach, that is primarily during the day, right? So daytime hours.
Yes.
Is that preferred? If you had more funding, would you extend it, or is it like a safety issue, so you want it during the daytime? Like what would be the preferred method?
I think ideally, our initial plan was to be like 10 to 6 or 7. But what happens is we get so many calls overnight that you have to respond early so you can get into the camps before people leave for the day. So we have drifted earlier. My preference, what we did before in our street outreach program is we had 2 shifts. We had a first shift and a second shift. So we had essentially outreach until like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. That's ideal. You always want at least 2 people out at any given time for safety reasons. But if the funding is there, absolutely I would want 2 shifts, because I think it is beneficial. You have to catch people in the morning before they leave camp, but also it is also beneficial to be able to catch them when they get back to camp in the evening.
And also to catch them before they're intoxicated.
Right. And we don't know.
We run into that challenge.
Are you a morning drinker or an evening drinker? So you have to figure that out. Sure enough.
Any other questions for this program? The next item on our agenda is just public announcements or comments. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Okay. Our next meeting is April 19th at 1:30. It's here. On the agenda for those presentations, we have 2 presentations from Community Action Council, one from Greenhouse 17, and one from New Vista. So that is all of our business for today. I can take a motion to adjourn.
It was April 19th, what?
April 19th at 1:30.
Joy, I defer to you.
I move.
I'll second.
Okay, we stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.